Hey everyone, welcome back. We're going to be diving deep into a topic that's, well, it's kind of controversial, I guess. Fluoride and brain development.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely one that gets people talking, that's for sure.
Yeah, so we found this pretty interesting new study out of the University of Queensland in Australia. And we're going to take a look at that along with some of the reactions that it got online, mostly on Reddit. So, what's our mission today? We're going to try to break down this pretty complex issue and hopefully learn something along the way.
Sounds good to me. It's something that I think a lot of people worry about. Anything that might, potentially affect brain development, especially when it comes to kids.
For sure. Okay, so let's start with this University of Queensland study. What were the researchers looking at, and what did they find out?
Well, they looked at a group of young adults. There were 357 of them, all between 16 and 26 years old. And these folks had actually participated in another study. It was a national oral health study back in, when was it? 2012 to 2014, I think. Anyway, that earlier study gave the researchers some really valuable data on their early childhood exposure to fluoridated water. So this time around, they assessed these participants' IQ scores and then compared those scores to their fluoride exposure back when they were little.
Okay, so did early exposure to fluoride end up having like a negative impact on cognitive development?
It didn't. And the results were actually kind of surprising. The people who consistently drank fluoridated water when they were kids, they actually scored higher on the IQ tests, like a little over 1 point higher on average.
Higher. Wait, so they didn't find a negative impact. There was actually like a positive correlation? That's really interesting. What about people who maybe had too much fluoride, though?
Yeah, that's a great question. The researchers took a look at that too. They looked at individuals with something called dental fluorosis. It's a condition that can happen if you have too much fluoride, usually when you're a kid and your teeth are still developing.
Yeah.
But even among those folks, they still found slightly higher IQ scores.
Wow. Okay. This is definitely kind of going against what a lot of people think about fluoride, huh? So if they didn't find negative impacts, did the study look at any potential benefits, benefits of fluoride?
Yeah, they did. The researchers wanted to point out the benefits of fluoride when it comes to preventing tooth decay, which is a pretty big global health problem. Did you know that tooth decay is the most common chronic childhood disease in the entire world?
I did not.
That's true. And it can have some pretty bad consequences like pain, trouble eating, and even tooth loss.
Wow, that's no good. So basically the study is saying that fluoride is still important for dental health. Did the researchers specifically come out and say, hey, we need to expand water fluoridation programs?
They did. They basically said that water fluoridation, as it's done in Australia, is safe, and that expanding these programs could really help to improve dental health around the world.
Okay, so we have this study that suggests there might even be some cognitive benefits to fluoride, and it definitely reinforces the dental benefits. But you also took a look at how people were reacting to this study online, specifically on Reddit. What were people saying?
Yeah, I took a look at Reddit, and as you can imagine, there were a lot of different opinions. Some people seemed cautiously optimistic, and others were just straight up skeptical.
Okay. What were some of the specific questions or concerns that people raised?
One of the main things that people brought up was socioeconomic factors. Some folks on Reddit pointed out that wealthier areas tend to adopt water fluoridation sooner than other areas. And wealthier areas also usually have better access to healthcare and education. So they were basically asking, is it the fluoride that's causing the higher IQ scores? Or is it just that these kids have other advantages?
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's like, are the kids scoring better because of the fluoride or because they already have a leg up in other areas of their lives? What else were people talking about?
Another interesting thing that came up was, well, some people wondered if maybe the IQ difference wasn't because of the fluoride directly, but maybe because of the lack of tooth decay and inflammation. Maybe preventing the tooth decay is actually what helps with cognitive development.
So it's not about the fluoride itself making you smarter, but more about stopping something that could be holding you back, like a healthy mouth, healthy mind kind of thing.
Exactly. And that's actually something that the study didn't really address, which is probably why it got people talking so much on Reddit.
It sounds like people on Reddit were raising some good points that the study itself didn't really cover.
Yeah, I think online forums like Reddit, even though they have their downsides, can be really good for getting into those nuances and the more complicated details that you might not see in just one research study.
It definitely reminds us that science is always evolving, and one study isn't going to give us all the answers. This University of Queensland study is definitely important, but it's not the end of the conversation about fluoride by any means.
I agree with that, and I think this Reddit discussion really shows that.
We've covered a lot already, but there's still more to talk about. What other key things did you find in the Reddit discussions, and how does it all connect to this bigger picture of fluoride's potential impact?
Oh yeah, we're just getting started. The Reddit discussion got into some pretty interesting stuff about dosage and different ways that fluoride can be delivered. These are things that don't always get talked about when people are arguing about whether or not to put fluoride in the water.
Yeah, let's get into that.
Right.
What were people saying about the dosage?
A lot of people were worried about whether the fluoride levels in that Australian study were like realistic. You know, like do those levels actually reflect what people are exposed to in their everyday lives? And even if they do, what happens if you go over those levels? Is there a point where fluoride actually becomes harmful, even though this study seems to be saying that it's a good thing?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like with anything, right? Too much of a good thing can be bad.
Did anyone on Reddit mention any specific research or examples about the downsides of having too much fluoride?
Yeah. Some people brought up this report by the National Toxicology Program. They call it the NTP. And they found that if you have double the recommended amount of fluoride, it can actually lower IQ in kids.
Whoa, wait. So that's like the opposite of what the Australian study found. They
Hmm.
found higher IQ scores even in people who had signs of too much fluoride. How do we make sense of that? Yeah, that's a really good question. And it shows why it's so important to look at the specifics of each study. The NTP report was looking at much higher fluoride levels than the Australian one. And they were looking at a different group of people, kids specifically, in places where the water naturally has a lot of fluoride in it. So you can't really compare the two directly.
So it's not like a fair comparison. The Australian study focused on fluoride in the water and at specific levels, while the NTP looked at higher levels from different sources, and specifically in kids.
Exactly. And this is where those socioeconomic factors that we were talking about before come back into play. The NTP report basically said that fluoride might have a bigger impact on brain development in kids who are already facing other health problems,
Yeah.
kids from disadvantaged backgrounds.
Okay, so it gets even more complicated. You have to think about the levels of fluoride, where it's coming from, how old the person is, their overall health, and their socioeconomic status. It's not just a simple, is fluoride good or bad question.
You got it. It's really complicated. And that's what gets lost a lot of the time when people are debating about putting fluoride in the water.
It's like that saying, the dose makes the poison, right? Even water can be bad for you if you drink too much of it.
That's a good way to put it.
Right.
It's the same with fluoride. It can be good for you at the right levels, but bad for you if you get too much.
So what are people supposed to do? How can they make good decisions about how much fluoride they're getting for themselves and their families?
Well, that's where those other ways of getting fluoride come in. Like you were saying before, some people on Reddit were talking about how fluoride toothpaste might be a better way to go. Instead of putting fluoride in the water for everyone.
Right, because that way you're putting the fluoride directly on your teeth where you need it. And maybe you end up swallowing less of it.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
But like most things, it's not quite that simple. There's some other things to think about too.
Like what? What are some of the downsides of just using fluoride toothpaste?
Well, for one thing, not everyone can afford it. And some people don't even have easy access to basic dental hygiene products.
Yeah, that's true. It's easy to forget that something like toothpaste can be a luxury for some people.
And even if people do have it, there's no guarantee that they're using it the right way or using it at all, especially kids.
So even though fluoride toothpaste seems like it could be a better way to do it, in the real world, it might not be so simple.
Exactly. And that kind of highlights a big problem in public health. How do you find solutions that actually work and that are fair for everyone?
So it's not just about finding something that works in a lab. It has to work for everyone in the real world.
Right. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations about fluoride. It's not just a scientific debate, it's a societal one. It's about access and equity and individual choice.
Okay, so we've talked about the study, the Reddit reactions, concerns about dosage, and different ways to get fluoride. That's a lot to take in. What are the key takeaways here?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is that this whole fluoride thing is way more complicated than people make it out to be. There are good points on both sides. And there's not going to be one easy solution that fixes everything. There are too many factors involved.
So instead of trying to find one answer that works for everyone, we need to understand that different people might need different approaches.
Exactly. And the other thing is that people should consider a lot of different factors when they're making decisions about fluoride, like what's the water like in their area? Do they have good access to dental care? What are their own personal risk factors?
This has been really eye-opening. Before we wrap up, I want to ask you something. We've been talking about how fluoride might affect individual brain development. But what about its impact on society as a whole? What do you think about that?
What do you mean?
Well, if fluoride really does have some kind of effect on brain function, even if it's a small one, could that be changing the way we think and learn as a society? Could it be affecting our collective intelligence?
Now, that's an interesting thought. I don't know if we have enough evidence to say for sure, but it definitely makes you think. If fluoride is affecting our brains on an individual level, what does that mean for society as a whole?
You're making me think too. I guess this deep dive isn't over yet. We've just uncovered another layer of complexity.
I guess so. And it's one that I'm definitely interested in exploring more. But maybe we should save that for another deep dive.
Yeah, good idea. We've given our listeners a lot to think about for now. Let's wrap things up with a few final thoughts, and as always, we'll leave everyone with something to consider. It's kind of wild to think about, right? Something like fluoride. Most of us probably don't even think about it twice, except maybe when we're brushing our teeth or getting a glass of water. But it could have all these far-reaching effects.
It really is.
Yeah.
It just goes to show that even the little things, things that might seem totally unimportant on their own, can end up having a big impact on society as a whole.
Okay, so we've talked about the science, the individual health stuff, and even some of the bigger societal questions. If you were to step back and sum it all up, what are the most important things for people to remember about fluoride?
Well, I think the number one thing to remember is that there's no easy answer when it comes to fluoride. It's not just a simple good or bad kind of thing. There's research that supports both sides. And the way it affects people can be different depending on a bunch of things, like how much you're getting, individual sensitivity, even socioeconomic factors.
So it's all about understanding that it's complicated and that there's not going to be one solution that works for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other important thing is that we need to move past those really polarized debates and try to look at this issue with a more, I don't know, a more nuanced perspective. We need to be able to listen to people's concerns, but also acknowledge that fluoride can do some good, especially for dental health.
So basically, we need to get away from this idea that fluoride is either all good or all bad, and try to find a more balanced view, one that takes into account all the different evidence and opinions.
Exactly. And I think that means we need to be more critical of the information that we're getting. Don't just believe everything you read. Look past the headlines, dig into the details of the research, figure out how the studies were done and what their limitations are.
That's good advice no matter what you're reading about. Don't just take everything at face value. Ask questions, do your own research, and form your own opinions.
Right. And it's important to remember that science is always changing. What we think we know today might be different tomorrow. We have to be open to new information and new ideas.
Okay, so with all that in mind, what would you say to people who are trying to figure out what to do about fluoride, for themselves and their families?
Honestly, I think the best thing to do is to talk to your doctor or dentist. They can give you advice that's specifically for you, based on your health history and any risks that you might have. And don't be afraid to ask them questions or to do your own research. There's a lot of good information out there, but you have to be careful and look for information that's based on evidence, not just opinions or stories.
Great advice. And like we always say, stay curious. This deep dive into fluoride has definitely given me a lot to think about, and I hope it's done the same for our listeners.
Yeah, me too. If it gets people thinking and talking about this stuff,
Yeah.
then I think we've done our job.
Well said. All right, folks. That's it for another deep dive. We hope you enjoyed it and maybe learned a thing or two. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.